Welcome back. The panel is here. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander, Amna Nawaz, co-anchor of PBS NewsHour, and Leigh Caldwell, co-author of The Washington Post Early 202 and anchor of Washington Post Live. Thanks to all of you for being here today. Peter, I want to start with you, and obviously our poll has some really concerning numbers for the White House, particularly on the economy. How is the White House dealing with these broader concerns about his re-election?
Well, it's not good news for this White House, certainly. They dismiss polls like these, national polls saying nobody votes on a national basis. It's the states that matter. They say we're a year out from the election. But all that acknowledges the fact that this is a big issue, both the president's age and the issue of the economy. You showed the numbers on each of those issues. Nearly 3 in 4 Americans have a real concern about age. And it's forced this White House, I think, to lean into two things. One is that contrast with Donald Trump earlier than they may have wanted to, based on the conversations I'm having with Democratic allies right now. We've heard him sort of sharpen his language. It's the end of the spending quarter, so a lot of it's been at fundraisers, but saying that Donald Trump is trying to destroy democracy. And they've also lifted up their spending, the biggest ad buy ever in battleground states this early for a re-election campaign. They had one of the first ads out of the gates was about the trip to Ukraine the president took. It wasn't about the issue of Ukraine. It was on the topic of stamina that gets right to the topic of his age.
That's a really fascinating point, trying to have that show of force with him standing there with President Zelensky. Amna, let me pivot to you on that point, because when you look at what voters are saying, and I think we have this poll, look at how many of them say that they would potentially back a third-party candidate. If you add it all up, it adds up to 14%.
That's right.
That has to be a real concern for the White House, for Biden allies, because of course, a third-party candidate, if one does get into the race till the end, the thinking is it would hurt President Biden.
And you notice a 3-point difference there between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden. That's within the margin of error on these kinds of polls. So not great numbers. And also that we're hearing, of course, Mr. Kennedy is considering a third party right now, and he has already been polling in double digits in some cases when just looking at potential Democratic primaries. This is why every single constituency matters. And that's why something like this UAW strike really makes a difference for President Biden, because this is a group that helped put Mr. Trump into the White House in 2016 with just enough voters there. In 2020, they broke for President Biden by about 56 to 42 over then President Trump. And in 2023, what we're now seeing is a backsliding in support there. When you're talking about voters who do not have a college degree, we've seen a softening of support there, similar to the softening you covered earlier with Black voters, young voters, Latino voters, independents. Each of these core groups matters, and that enthusiasm gap is huge. It's a huge problem for the Biden administration.
The concern, Leigh, that these core constituencies will stay at home. You're talking to Democrats on Capitol Hill. What are they saying when they look at these numbers? What do they make of them, these numbers that are consistent with past numbers that we've seen, these deep concerns about the economy?
Well, I think you hit it. And also the poll said something very similar from what I'm hearing from Democrats. The concern about the enthusiasm and the motivation. One thing the NBC poll pointed out today is that a majority of voters were more interested in voting for Biden because they did not like Donald Trump. And that is not a good sign to turning out the base. And so concerns on Capitol Hill are big, but people are also saying it's kind of late to make a change.
It is. And Amna, to the point that you're making, or Peter, I should say, to the point that Amna's making about UAW, here you're going to have this split screen with President Biden in Michigan and then former President Trump on Wednesday in Detroit. He's trying to counter-program the GOP primary debate, but talk about the politics of this decision to go, because some union workers on the front line say, don't turn this into a political event. We want a deal.
Well, Democratic officials, we should say, NBC News has learned, had invited President Biden to come out on Labor Day to first make a visit. The president balked at that, is now going to be going after Sean Fain, the UAW president, invited him. The key takeaways here are a couple. One, the White House is still trying to figure out exactly who the UAW President Sean Fain is. The president doesn't have a long relationship with him. He's a Bernie progressive, right? So it's made it a little bit more complicated. When the president gets out there this week, though, when you speak to Democratic allies, as I have in the last couple of days, they say two things. One, this is the most obvious thing for the president to do. This is core to who he is. But two, they also acknowledge there's a bit of a risk here, because by going to the picket lines, as he plans to do, you also potentially own the outcome here. And if it's not the one that the UAW workers like, perhaps it could be a problem it is a delicate, tricky political scene for him.
Fascinating point. Let's turn to the shutdown. Speaking of owning the outcome,
Yeah.
Republicans are deadlocked. Leanne, it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. How does this end? Are we headed toward a shutdown? What are you hearing?
We are absolutely headed toward a shutdown. Most people think that it is a shutdown. This is a shutdown because Republicans cannot agree. It's not a shutdown because there's disagreement between Republicans and Democrats. And Kevin McCarthy has a choice. It is up to him on if he wants a government shutdown to try to govern with just Republicans, or will he reach out to Democrats and try to avoid a shutdown? We haven't seen that yet.
I would just say we're going to see the president this week. This is a big week for the president because he's going to be going to Arizona the day after the debate by the Republicans, right? And the focus is, it's been all about democracy, we had heard. He's going to the McCain Institute, but it's also about one other thing, bipartisanship. And in large part, that's a reaction to what we're seeing happening on the Hill right now that the White House has tried to brand as the Republican shutdown. Susan Collins even acknowledges things like this don't go well for Republicans.
Yeah, Amna, it's true. If there's a shutdown, you have Republicans saying, historically, we bear the brunt of that.
Yes.
That's going to hurt us.
You have some Republicans saying that, right? You
Yeah.
have Speaker McCarthy saying that.
Yeah,
you have
some
Senate Republicans
Republicans
saying that. I spoke with House Freedom Caucus member, South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman last week. He said it's 100% sure they are heading towards a shutdown. And look, Kristen, the math ain't mathin', right? There's just a certain amount of days left. Norman said that they want to see a top line number. They had previously offered 1.471. They haven't seen a top line number from leadership, yes. But yeah, the idea is if there is a shutdown, it hurts the economy. We know that to be true. And Republicans could end up bearing most of that. I will say, to bring it full circle on this, if the economy does get hit, that's also bad for this president, though, because you see inflation coming down, unemployment at historic lows. They need the economy to be doing better to strengthen their campaign next year.
All right. Well, fantastic conversation. Thank you, all of you. That is all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.